So, Larry, why don't you tell us how your life is?
Well, my life is pretty good, except for all the horrible events that I experience every waking minute of my existence. But oh yeah, everything else is excellent.
Okay, Larry, how is your relationship with your parents?
Well, sometimes I feel that my parents don't really understand me, you know? I mean, sometimes I feel that they don't even notice me or even care what happens to me. Mom, shut up. Mom, shut up. Mom, shut up. Mom, shut up, shut up, shut up! Mom.
The stupid remote is broken again! Ugh.
So my relationship with my parents is complicated, but interesting.
Yes, now why don't you tell us about how school is?
Oh, school is great. Besides getting beat up all the time from bullies, cheerleaders, nerds, and the occasional principal, I get beat up quite a bit, but it doesn't affect my schoolwork.
So, how well do you do in school?
Well, I've technically been getting straight A's for years.
Technically?
Well, my classmates take turns stealing my work and handing it in, but I don't mind.
Okay, I think people are starting to lose interest, so I'm going to ask you one of the more interesting questions.
Okay?
What was the most traumatizing thing that ever happened to you?
Well, I'm gonna have to think about that. There are just so many to choose from, you know? Well, I'd have to say it was that time I was attacked in class. It all started just a few weeks ago, I think. I was sitting down in class along with all the other students when I looked over at the creepy kid.
The creepy kid.
Yes, well, you see, that's what I call this really odd kid in my class, since no one knows his name. He just spends his time in class staring at me. He doesn't blink, he doesn't talk or move. He just sits there and stares. That one day was most horrible in particular because I looked over to the creepy kid since it was a very boring class, and again, he was just staring at me. This time I stared at him. We stared at each other for a long time, when suddenly these strange blue dots appeared where his eyes ought to be. It's like he had some kind of horrible disease. I didn't really do anything but watch as the dots took over his face. Then he grew this weird blue tentacle out of the back of his head. It wrapped around and around until his face was fully wrapped. Then he just sat still. I sat and watched as the tentacles parted, revealing a gaping darkness. I stared into it, afraid of what might happen next. When suddenly 2 tentacles shot out of the darkness, they slashed around horribly and grew longer. One of the worst parts was that the whole class didn't even notice. The tentacles grew larger and slammed onto the desk of one of my fellow students. The student didn't even notice anything, which is when I started to doubt the intelligence of the other people in the class. The tentacles began waving around furiously, but after the tentacles burrowed through my brain, everything went black. I don't really remember anything after that.
That truly was horrible and boring. Next question, which has an obvious answer. Do you have a girlfriend?
No.
Ooh, shocker.
There was one girl I almost fell in love with once. Or thought I did anyway. But you don't want to hear about that.
Well, I don't really care, but others might. Go ahead and tell the story. I'm going to make a sandwich.
My story begins in the hallways of my school. The cheerleaders were talking gibberish. I, however, was late and had just arrived at school because my dad deep-fried my alarm clock and ate it, so I slept in. I arrived just in time to catch the ending of an announcement.
And even though she will be here a bit late, she should still be here before the beginning of your next class. Goodbye, students.
I then ran over to the cheerleaders. Hey, Martha, what was that announcement about? Are we getting a new student in our class? But of course, she decided to do the unhelpful thing and spray me in the eyes with something. It hurts so much! Ah! Ah! Ow! Why? When Martha and her team of ugly witches walked away, leaving me with my eyes melting. And then she came in.
I wanna know what love is. I want you to show me.
Fortunately, she didn't notice me crying on the floor. When I saw her, it was impossible to describe. She was absolutely beautiful from what I could see, since my eyes were still painfully bloodshot and watery. But her blurry face almost made me forget all the horrible pain I was in. Then everything went dark. I probably fainted from all the pain and the constant feeling that my blood was coming out of my eyes. When I woke up, I expected to be in the hospital or the nurse's office at least, but instead I woke up on the hallway floor after school was over.
Well, that's all very interesting, but it looks like you're gonna have to finish your story next time.
What? I thought you said the interview was gonna last an hour.
Yes, well, unfortunately it seems my camera was left on in my suitcase before I came here.
But that's completely unfair.
Hey, you're lucky if anyone stayed around to watch it this long. I'll be back with some more film later. See ya.
Well, that's just